So this weekend, I'm at the house, minding my own business, and President Donald Trump went down to Alabama. He was the commencement speaker. And there'd been a lot about that. Like, it is worth noting, and this is in large part just because it's a college and it's young people and stuff like that, but Trump did not win the vote at the University of Alabama. So this is actually somewhat of a controversial idea of having him as the commencement speaker. Like, maybe not with the Roll Tide in overall general, right? Like the Roll Tide, the state of Roll Tide, not so much. The University of Roll Tide, maybe slightly different. So then I look up, and Nick Saban is doing the introduction for Trump, which I have to say, a touch surprising given what most of us who are somewhat familiar with that world think we know about Nick Saban's politics.
Or what we definitely know. Like, to clarify, that man was, I believe, a blue dog Democrat, i.e., he was a Joe Manchin guy. So, like, old school, what we would call the rural Democrat, the Democrat who's like, I would really like a highway named after me because I built it and appropriate. Like, if you go to West Virginia, Robert Byrd, everything's named after Robert Byrd, right? Senator Robert Byrd, because he had that pipeline and was just shunting money into West Virginia. That's very much Nick Saban's political bona fides. To see him introducing Donald Trump, I have a very, very specific take on it. That sucks, man. That sucks.
It was a little bit disappointing, but I also got the feeling from like checking some of the jokes and stuff that he was making up there, seemed a little nervous about it.
Probably pretty nervous about it. Probably could have carried it off a little slicker if he'd said, "It's your president. I'm here to introduce Donald Trump." Right?
Yes.
Like that's really what he could have done at the University of Alabama, given what he accomplished there. But yeah, it absolutely sucks. I'm sure in his mind, there's some kind of rationale for doing it and acting like this is a normal thing. For anyone watching it, no, you don't have to entertain that. It's ass.
Well, the explanation I think that he would give is the one that brings us to this here podcast, is not to simply talk about Nick Saban going there, is that apparently while there, Nick Saban asked Donald Trump to do something about NIL. Now, I don't know what exactly he wanted done, but I do know I received a phone call this morning from the good folks at CNN, and they asked me to come on television on Tuesday, and I said, what for? And they said, because Donald Trump is considering an executive order on NIL, which I believe is to limit the payments.
That's cool. Oh, so you're saying that there's a 3-letter slogan that Donald Trump has a strong opinion on, but actually doesn't know anything about. That man doesn't know anything. Let's just get this out of the way. Doesn't know jack. Somebody came to him, somebody famous, and said, "Hey, I'm a famous person. You're a famous person. You should do something about this." And he's like, "Absolutely. What is it?" No, he didn't even ask that. He didn't get to that stage. It's just like the NIL. It's bad. And in his pudding brain, he's like, yeah. It's real bad because this guy wants it done. And then he asked Tommy Tuberville, who evidently has his like fingers in this as well, and got the idea that NIL was bad. If you ask Donald Trump what NIL was, you get a 4-minute answer, and none of it would have anything to do with NIL. Doesn't know shit, didn't do any of the reading, didn't do any of the research, won't do any of the research, will issue an executive order and immediately forget what he did. He forgot he was going to open Alcatraz. He watched Escape from Alcatraz on TV last weekend, was like, "Hey, let's reopen that." Somebody asked about it the next day, and he's like, and gave a complete bullshit answer. It's incredible how nothing that man knows or attempts to know. And that's what it's going to be with NIL. And also, I'm sorry, none of it's going to be legal anyway, right? None of it. Like, they're going to go back to the courts who have smacked down every attempt to limit this, and they're not going to get it. And I'm sorry, there's just one more thing, Bo. The piece of legislation that is actually attempting to do this, do you know who is co-sponsoring it? Ted Cruz. Do you know what Ted Cruz is for any piece of legislation? Cholera. Plague. No one wants to sign it because no one wants to work with Ted Cruz. There. Sorry. Done.
No, so the problem is this, and I am not exactly sure if what Trump is talking about doing is limiting NIL payments. All I know is that somebody told him you should do something about that. And he was like, you know what? I think I will. Now, something is a very broad and vague term. We don't know what exactly that thing is. And what we do know and where this gets to be tricky is someone does need to do something, right? Like I did something for Game Theory 2 years ago about this, that basically, for those who don't understand, what wound up happening was once the court said the players could be paid for their name, image, and likeness, NIL, the NCAA, rather than coming up with a plan themselves, just begged Congress, do something, come up with something. Help us out. We need some help with these rules instead of coming up with them themselves. But what people did not realize was at the same time, the NCAA was spending big money on lobbyists to prevent players from being seen as employees, right? So where we stand with this now that I think is so interesting is that I think that Saban really does think something needs to be done about this. I do think that Saban believes in what some might consider to be some of the more naive elements of the ideas of college sports or amateurism, however you want to refer to it, or what part of it you want to talk about. He does believe that these games help make for better people. He does believe that as a football coach that he can help steward and shepherd these young men through different places. And he does believe, and I don't think he's wrong about this, that a lot of the changes that have happened, for me, it is eliminating the year you had to sit for transferring, has created a lack of stability that is not necessarily good for the players, even though they get some money out of the deal. I think all of those things are right. I think the part that gets lost is anybody that anyone is going to ask to do something about it will not be somebody who advocates for players at all, like a single bit whatsoever. Donald Trump is not up there like, we need to protect the rights of these players. We can't have somebody get screwed over like Jaden Rashada did that one time. No. And please understand, that level of chaos still exists. Where the money ain't the money. Was it last year that quarterback at UNLV was like, hey, bruh, I ain't getting the bread I thought I was going to get. I'm out of here. All those possibilities still front and center with NIL. Is the president or Congress going to do anything about those? I don't know, because I'm not sure what agenda exactly they think they're serving by getting involved in this.
Absolutely not. And I don't think that there's necessarily the kind of public support, because honestly, it's not a matter of the public openly supporting players. I think we've seen that that's a dodgy assumption at best. I think it's that nobody understands it and nobody understands what's happening. They just say, oh, the players are paid now. It's cool. Oh, not exactly. But I think what you'll end up with is conferences coming up with some sort of guidelines for what their NIL caps, et cetera, are going to look like vis-a-vis revenue sharing, which is funny because you and I both know if we tell everybody in, I'll just pick a conference at random here, the SEC. If we tell everyone in the SEC, you got a $35 million payroll or you got a $45 million payroll, there's a cap, we'll need to see evidence that you went under it. They will cheat. They will cheat. That's it. Do you know what you've just established? More of what we've already been doing.
I was about to say, we already tried a cap. You don't think of it as a cap because it was too good of a cap. It was the zero cap, right? Yep. No money for nobody. People have been willing to go to jail for a long time in order to make these things happen, to pay people. Once you put the cap on, no. And so I think a flaw with all of this that gets lost and why a cap can only work so well, this is not... Money in this game is not a function of revenue. In fact, it is entirely not tied to revenue because the people historically who have spent the money to pay players, they're not spending from revenue, right? The motivation that they have, they're not putting this money in so they can make money. They're putting this money in because it makes them feel good. So we're going to wind up with two levels of this. The revenue sharing, which the courts have required, and we're going to see this come down this year. And that is a necessary component of this because what the schools have been doing, which is, how about we pass the hat and you dummies pay our players? How about that, right? That part had gone, but no, now the schools have to come out of this as parts of the TV deal because of a court decision. Okay, cool. That'll work. But this rest of it is people who would love nothing more than to trick off on some swole ass boys. That's what they want to do.
They want that. they need that. Like that is definitely like a booster thing. It is an ego thing for a lot of boosters in terms of I will acquire talent vis-a-vis my heavy ass wallet. That is something that they like to do, and it is something that gives them, it's a big face moment for a booster to do that in certain contexts. You can't tell me that's not a Texas A&M booster who's like, yeah, I got that guy. I paid
Yes.
him. I dropped many dimes. I
Hold
dropped
on.
many dollars in order
Say
to let that happen.
what they really would say. It was one of two things: either I bought him, or similarly uncomfortable, he's mine.
Yeah. And I'm not saying either of those.
We're not, but they are. They are. You're
are.
not. Wait, if I say, here's what you're not about to become, that meme. I understand you completely. I did that for you. You know what I'm saying?
Appreciate you.
Like it gets to that uncomfortable place. But that's what it is, man. These cats go trick that bread off. And look, it's not just for football and basketball. I had to be careful about this because different people want their money for different things. Somebody cares about women's basketball. Somebody cares about field hockey. Like they over there getting some bread that none of us thought they would get. And by the way, they're going to get that bread and they don't generate revenue because once again, it's not a function of the money they make. The Ronald Reagan years made it where nothing is important if it doesn't make money. And these cats are like, maybe that's true, but that's not why we do this. We do this for fun. I cannot imagine, and I grew up, say, rooting for the Atlanta Falcons. I ain't never think about paying no money for no players.
No, fortunately, the Falcons felt that way too for a significant portion of their history.
Fair. But we ain't passing the hat, dog. And that's how bad people want to do it. So if you say, well, we need to put a cap on NIL, we know how that's not going to work.
Yeah, remember, the money is going to run downhill if it wants to run downhill. And there is no way to dam it. It will find a way under, around, or if needs be, through. So how do you deal with that? The revenue sharing NIL combo is probably the dynamic we'll land on. Any imposition from Congress or above is going to come into so many. And Matt Brown, who knows a lot about these things, if you subscribe to the Extra Points newsletter, he writes cogently, entertainingly, and often on college sports and the business of college sports. And one of the things that he believes is that there's a real threat of legislation here. That's my verbiage, by the way, because I think it would be a threat to the way, to the overall quality of the way we do things, because I don't trust them to come up with a good system or solution. And I don't trust them to come up with something that A, works for the athlete, or B, doesn't favor the institution. I think that's just how law works. It'll favor the institution over the individual, and the mailbox over the person, right? Like I think the commodity usually ends up winning when we're talking about writing legislation. But he thinks it's a danger. He thinks it's something that could actually happen. So we have to entertain two options: that they might do something and it'll be just as bad as you imagine.
I don't think that the Congress people, senators, however you want, whichever ones we're talking about, I don't think they know what side they're supposed to be on anymore. Right? Because the obvious answer before was we're on the side of not paying players, right? The side that involves not giving black people money, historically, been a winner, right? But now people have got a taste of this new NIL life, and it's chaotic. It's problematic for the future of the sport, all of that. But I also think that people kind of like it a little bit, right? Like they kind of like the idea of what it is. And so you now let's take a school like Miami. I don't know how many of their billionaire boosters are still billionaires because that's how money works in Miami.
Correct.
But they had a little run where they felt like they could throw a bunch of bread and go make some things happen. You think they want to go back to it being even Steven? Right? You think SMU does not? SMU was like, finally, we've been waiting on this day, right? Right? We started this gangster shit. Like, wasn't nobody out here throwing bread like us. You think we about to stop? You got this messed up. So, like, if I'm Ted Cruz, I don't know what the answer is that wins me points, right? However, to be fair, Ted Cruz has figured out how to be a successful politician without being liked by people. And I don't really know how he's made that work, but he has.
Without doing his job. His job is presumably to legislate. He's got next to nothing on that record. So, a neat trick, dude. Congratulations. I don't know where he lands in Texas, because if all politics are local, and I do believe they are, And he is aligned with the people that I think he is aligned with, which is every major college football program, ostensibly in Texas. He shows up and they lose. That's kind of his thing. That if he shows up and is like, "Go Red Raiders," Texas Tech's going to lose. Or if he says, "Go Baylor," Baylor's going to get pummeled. That's how it works. Not only for college sports, by the way, across all sports, the man is such a blight on your potential to win that his staffers will go online and immediately contest when you say these things and say, "Well, he showed up at a Cowboys game and they won," which actually is pretty remarkable. But anyway, where does he land? Because you and I were just talking about SMU, the grand tradition of paying people, the pioneers, the OGs of illicit cash under the table to pay players. Where does he land with those people? Because they want this. They want some way. In my mind, given his leanings and given his interests, they probably want something more akin to the old system where we could just say, "Oh, well, we're not going to pay players," and the rich end up winning anyway because they're going to write those checks.
Right. They need to, at the very least, I think the part that everybody should agree on, a deal's a deal. that part, there needs to be some standard of a deal's a deal. Because part of why a deal's a deal doesn't really hold in this is it takes a long time to get like lawsuit stuff going. And so by the time a deal's a deal is adjudicated, it may be years, for example, right? But a deal does have to be a deal. And on both sides, a deal is not a deal. And I've talked about this with people, and it's not every time a coach complains about the current state of affairs, somebody's like, "Oh, you don't like it now that the players have power." The players still don't actually have any power because the coaches are still making the decision on how much money everybody gets, right? The players still are not organized. They don't really have any backup behind them. They have a little more leverage and they got some money, but they don't actually have any power. But for the coaches, can you imagine these little snot-nosed punks coming in your office every other week asking for a raise because they're using the sensibilities of 18, 19, and 20-year-olds? They don't know anything about how stuff works. They don't know any protocol or any of this stuff. And you got to deal with those phone calls all the time. That's what happened with Buddy at Tennessee, for example. It was like, hey, kid, it doesn't go like that.
Yeah, and they will call it. They will call it, and you will have to leave. If you don't have any power by staying, if your only power is in departure, then you're coming half loaded to the table. And that's most players, to be honest, at this point in college football. Your departure is really the only threat. Your staying isn't necessarily what they're weighing because we can find other people. You understand the transfer market works both ways. Like the idea that there aren't people who are prospects out there that they will instantly call up or poach the minute they need somebody else. This is what GMs are for. This is what the new personnel departments that have popped up over the past 10 or 15 years are for. It's with all those, all those extra polos. That's what they're there for. They're there to make sure that not only is your team equipped and ready at all times on the depth chart and that we have the talent that we need, it's to make sure that the talent is a little bit expendable. It's to make sure that it is replaceable and we have other prospects.
Right. And I know the one thing Congress ain't worried about is them boys and ladies. They're not. Like, that's not, there's still no seat at the table truly for them outside of if there's a class action lawsuit. That's it. In which case, if it's anything similar that I've been a part of, you just get an email that say we about to vote for something. And then you're like, yay or nay if you show up.
And the idea that they could come up with something that was electorally popular at this point, I think that's also the greatest challenge. I think you're totally right about that because I don't think they know what their winning move is here. That's it. Yeah. I don't think they know what their out is.
It's whatever Coach Blank says. It is.
At a dinner where I just grabbed a guy and suddenly that's policy. Suddenly that's how we're doing things. I just write it down and I signed it. And now everyone has to deal with it, which, by the way, again, won't happen. Every time this has gone to court, the NCAA and interests that say that you can't get the money that you make by making it for an institution. Every time that's come up, they have, I don't want to lose doesn't describe how badly they got it handed to them.
Every time. Every time.
Every time.
Like, it is amazing that this fiction stood up for as long as it did. They lost every time. They lost with the TV lawsuit in the 80s. They lose every time.
Every single time. In the 80s, when the institution of collegiate sports, the student athlete, still pretty sacrosanct, still pretty much assumed to be a net good. And the minute they went to the courts, they were like, how do you claim this as a business? This shouldn't be legal.